I think what's important to note is because that story is complicated and because the political relationship between Taiwan and mainland hasn't been resolved, and the relationship between different kinds of groups of people really on Taiwan hasn't been resolved, the history itself is very contested. The way that you tell that story invariably will upset somebody else who has a different view of what that history is. But I'll just mention a few key points and junctures in that history. Taiwan really originally, centuries ago, was populated by people who weren't ethnically Chinese. They are indigenous peoples. In the 16th century, for the most part, a migration began from Fujian province on mainland China, a migration of ethnic Chinese who populated Taiwan. Taiwan then, at the end of the 19th century, came under Japanese rule. It became a colony of Japan, and that changed and affected the way Taiwan developed. After the Second World War, because of agreements among the Allied powers, Taiwan was handed to, or handed back to, depending on how you interpret the history, handed to the Republic of China. But right after this handover happened in 1945, China itself fell into civil war between the nationalists and the communists. When the nationalists, who then controlled the government of China in 1945, sent military forces and civilian forces to Taiwan to claim sovereignty over Taiwan, local people, ethnic Chinese, but separate from the mainland, they weren't happy about that imposition of Republic of China rule. And they resisted it. And there were a series of crackdowns and massacres that happened during that period. Those crackdowns and massacres, to some extent, still affect politics on Taiwan today. Why is that? Well, politics diverged after the Chinese Civil War. The nationalists, who really lost the Civil War, ended up on Taiwan and began a long period of authoritarian rule on Taiwan, really beginning in 1949. And on the mainland, the communists controlled the country, still do today. On Taiwan, authoritarian rule lasted all the way through the late 1980s. After that point, however, Taiwan democratized, and it is a thriving democracy today. And through that democratic process, tensions between Chinese who came really during the Chinese Civil War, Chinese or the descendants of Chinese who had been on Taiwan for many centuries, those tensions are alive today, but are being resolved through a democratic process.